Right on. All right. Well, thanks, Moppa, for doing this, man. I appreciate you sitting down with me and
Anytime.
going through your musical world.
Cool.
You are, I would say, the finest band namer
Hey.
in all of New York City.
I will take it. Yeah. Great.
Where'd you come up with the name for Mostly Other People Do the Killing, and what was the origin of that group?
That name is from an article I read in school about Leon Theremin,
Oh, interesting.
inventor of the theremin.
I might get just a little bit closer to it.
Okay, get it like up
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this. Cool. So Leon Theremin invented the theremin in like the late teens, and then like did concert tours, and then kind of disappeared because Stalin disappeared him in the 30s, and then he showed up at like an electronic music convention in New York in the early like in like 1980 or something, and everybody was shocked that he was still alive, and so he did an interview then, and was asked about Stalin. And I still have this article someplace in one of these folders. And his response was that Stalin wasn't so bad because mostly other people did all the killing. I was like, that's a band name.
Yeah.
And so, and that band, there were like a couple of precursors to that band in college. Peter Evans, the trumpet player, and I went to school together. And we had a band my last year of school called Kimmy Gibbler that was alto saxophone, trumpet, bass drums, and that was one of like the test runs, and that band was really fun. And then I moved to New York a year before Peter did, because he's a year behind me in school, and I met John Arabagon and this whole Chicago contingent of people that I still play with a lot of: Brian Murray, John Lundbaum, Matt Kanellos, Arabagon, probably some other. Apologize to whoever I'm forgetting from that crew. Aaron Irwin. Matt McDonald. Anyway, they all went to Northwestern together, so I met them, and so kind of knew that Arabagon would be the alto player in that band as soon as Peter got to town.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And that was the thinking, and then you started the group, named the group.
I knew what the
beginnings
name
of
was before it even existed.
Yeah.
That'll be the name of the band. And then we started rehearsing in like the early fall of 2003.
Okay.
So Peter moved here over that summer, and kind of I wrote a bunch of the stuff that summer for the first record, and then we started playing in like September or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were the first couple of gigs?
The first couple of gigs were at Niagara, which is on the corner of Tompkins Square Park, and at that point there was a guy named Will Connell, multi-reed, older, kind of in the AACM school of things, and also in the super spiritual and warm and comforting. So he ran a weekly, I want to say Wednesday night, series at Niagara where he would have a band play 2 sets starting at 8 or something, and then there'd be an open jam session that Greg Glassman would host. And so this was in 02, 03, 04. And so when I first came to town, because Greg had told me about that, because he was also an Oberlin guy, and so I'd been to the jam session a couple of times and got to know Will, and then kind of talked to Will and was like, hey, I've got this quartet, could we do the gig? And so our first gig was in early November of 03 at Niagara, and then we probably played 4 or 5 times over the next year at that place. Plus, there's a guy named D Pop who was booking stuff at CBGB's and other kind of downtown places, doing kind of, greater free jazz style stuff. So we played in that first year a bunch of D Pop shows at, Bowery Poetry Club and CBGB's and those kinds of places. And then we recorded the first record like summer 04. So maybe like about a year into the band.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the band's been going for 17 years at this point.
Quite a long time.
That's pretty good, huh?
It's pretty good.
That's a pretty good run.
It's working out. It continues to work out. I mean, it became the thing that it is pretty fast.
Sure.
Like initially it was like, kind of Ornette inspired, chordal instrumentless quartet.
Yeah.
And it was a very straight ahead, like free jazz band initially. But then as we played more live shows, and then once Kevin Shea was the drummer, it got weirder in the way that it is weird now.
Okay.
In that the normal stuff got more normal and the weirder stuff got more weird, and the jumps between those two things got more chaotic.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah.
so within like 3 or 4 gigs, we'd be, playing a tune, and it would be a very straight ahead rhythm changes, like pretty up for like a minute and a half, followed by everything falls apart and it's totally skronky, and now we're playing Misty.
Sure.
And that took 8 seconds.
Yeah.
And so that kind of pretty quickly became the thing. But I guess, it took about a year. And then within a year, it was like, all right, this is not going to be a collective. We're going to play my tunes. We're going to do this thing to them and jump back and forth between things, and that is the thing that we do.
Yeah, because you got a real interesting approach with the group in that it's not as though it doesn't seem like you're writing tunes that are intentionally avant-garde or anything. Like you're kind of like in the tradition. Like the tunes that you write are all really, great tunes, but they're all sort of.
The tunes are really, really normal.
Yeah, and then the way that no matter what it is, you can take it to whatever degree.
And so it's funny for me to listen to like the tunes I wrote on that first record are weirder. They're like coming out of the Ornette thing.
Sure.
And, only one of those tunes gets played anymore. Like the rest of them's like, all right, these are not the thing.
Yeah.
This is like a good place to start, but this is not the thing.
Sure.
And so by the second record, all the tunes are basically Horace Silver tunes. If you want to get right down, like,
sure, yeah.
Here's some hard bop. Everything is very tonal and predictable, because as we started doing the thing, the trick that the band does of going in and out of things really fast works best if the written material is really recognizable instantly and really tonal.
Yeah.
And so the simpler, like dumb catchy melodies and really simple chord changes, so that when we're all freaking out, as soon as one person plays like 3 notes of a melody, we know exactly where we all are and can, if we want, jump in on that spot. And there's no complicated extended harmony, and I can't really tell if you're playing the tune or not, because it's like no, like that's 1-4-1 in C.
Yeah.
Like we all know where we're at.
Sure. Yeah.
And so all the subsequent writing for there's like a run of like 3 albums was just intentionally writing really conventional stuff so that we could take it apart and put it back together easily.
Yeah.
And then I decided by like about that third record that I didn't want to keep doing the same thing forever, because then it's like you can kind of see where this is going. Because now it's like 2009, we've been doing this for like 5 years. Right, we could just do this for the next like 40 years. And there's plenty examples in the canon of people that would do that, Horace Silver included. Like Horace Silver in the 90s does not sound different at all from Horace Silver in the 50s.
Sure.
It's just recorded a little better, and there's different guys in the band. And I was like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that was when we started doing like other weirder concept-ier stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because each album, do you think going into an album about, all right, here's the concept for the record? Because like you have like Red Hot and...
that started later.
Yeah.
So there was like, the first record was a trial run, and that was figuring out what the band was.
Yeah.
And then there was a run of 3 albums that are all basically the same album. And...
Now, what are those?
That's Shamokin, This Is Our Music,
Yep.
and 40 Fort.
Yeah.
And This Is Our Music and 40 Fort, are culled from the same recording sessions.
Okay.
And so we went into the studio over the course of about a year, I think like 4 times, and it's roughly chronological, but not really. And so those sessions are half of that stuff is on Music and half of that stuff is on 40 Fort, and those tunes are not chronological. Like there's stuff on the first album that was recorded after stuff that's on the second album. Yeah.
But it's the same concept.
It's the same concept. And like those 3 records are that version of the band.
Yeah.
And a lot of the tunes that we still play live all the time, like, when we played at Shapeshifter a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
We went into one of the tunes from Shamokin, like in the middle of something else. In the same way where it was like 3 notes of a melody got played and everybody knew where they were, and like now we're doing this tune that's I wrote in like 2006.
Sure.
And then back out of it. And
Yeah.
that still happens pretty often, and those 3 albums have all the tunes that we do that to. And subsequently, as things got more concept-ier, a few of those tunes wound up getting absorbed into the cut and paste canon that we use, but most of them not, because we would kind of do that trick within this new tune and within whatever concept we were doing. And so, like, some of the music that you would know from the 7-piece band, a couple of those tunes we will play, but very few of those have become the things that we just go into because they're a different thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're writing, are you thinking about for a particular group? Because when you were playing in Shapeshifter, you played a bunch. You played a lot of the same tunes in different groups or whatever.
That's a very recent development. That's like in the last year. But even then, yeah, I'm very much thinking about who's gonna play the stuff. So kind of there was that early run of records where that was written for the quartet, doing what the quartet does. Great. And
which was the concept.
We're
going to take these inside tunes.
I'm writing for Kevin and John and Peter, and I know what they're going to do with the thing that I give them, and we're going to do our thing, and great.
Yeah.
And so then the next thing I did was we did a smooth jazz record.
Okay.
Called Slippery Rock.
Okay.
And on that one, initially I was writing keyboard parts. Like John and Peter were going to maybe play keyboards, but then we did that live on a couple of gigs, and it was it didn't work.
Sure.
So then I kind of rearranged it for still the same quartet, but using this totally other. Basically, I bought a shit ton of smooth jazz records and got way into the kind of specific vocabulary of that music. Like you hear 4 notes of bebop and it's bebop.
Yeah.
And you hear 4 notes of post-train, post-bop, and what world you're in. And there's licks that are touchstones that everybody knows.
Yeah.
Right? You play a bunch of pentatonics that shift chromatically and you're in 1970 land.
Yeah.
And so the smooth jazz thing is abhorrent in a lot of ways.
I was going to ask you if you're trying to torture yourself.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, kind of. But so the thing is most of that music is terrible. But on the other hand, most music is terrible.
Sure.
It's
I'm okay with that.
Right,
yeah.
and I'm fine with that. And so the thing that smooth jazz does is there's certain mostly melodic gestures that are unique to that idiom. Mm-hmm. And they're it's got its own ornaments and it's got its own phrasing, and even taken out of context, you play certain ornaments and phrasings and you're in smooth jazz land.
Yeah.
Regardless of what's going on around you.
Sure.
So I wrote a bunch of songs kind of using that vocabulary and then doing to those tunes what we do to my tunes anyway. It's just now we've got another vocabulary that's entered the fray.
Sure.
Which had already happened anyway. Since the beginning of the band, that stuff would creep in as a sincere musical joke. We'd be in the middle of some art ensemble, everybody's freaking out, and then now we're playing Careless Whisper.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And that had been a standard thing that we would do anyway. So I was all right, let's bring that actually into the written material.
Sure.
Because you play a do and okay, cool, now we all know where we are, and bam, we can lock up. And David Sanborn's Hideaway is a tune that's in the book, and
okay,
every third or fourth gig we play Hideaway by Dave Sanborn, and it's one of those there are gestures in there that one chord change and we all know where we are.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing that I was interested in. So we did that record.
That was the first trip sideways into trying to do it.
Right, and very few people had any understanding what was going on. Which
in
was
the
fine.
public at large.
But public audiences, it was it was one of those things. It was already hard enough to describe to people what the band did, and then we did that, and we, the number of people who were just what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah.
It's whatever, don't worry about it. But I'm really happy with that record, and that kind of yielded a lot of pretty fun stuff. And so then we were on the tour for that. And that was when the idea for the 7-piece band happened. Mm-hmm. What would it be like if we expanded? What would it look like if we expanded the band? And we knew Dave Taylor from other weird stuff that we'd done with Dave Taylor, and we knew Brandon Seabrook from other weird stuff that we'd done with Brandon. Mm-hmm. And we had just started working with Ron Stabinsky. Mm-hmm. And so it was well, that's clearly going to be, those are the people we would add to this band. And so kind of getting back to your point of writing for specific people, then it was all right, so that band is going to be a trumpet, trombone, saxophone front line and a rhythm section with banjo. Cool. Now I'm going to listen to like Jelly Roll Morton and 1920s Armstrong and like Fletcher Henderson for the next like 6 months.
Yeah.
And then write a book of tunes that sounds like that.
Okay.
So in the same way I did that with the smooth jazz thing, now I'm going to do that with like the 20s.
Yeah.
You know.
But the personnel came first.
The personnel came first.
You said these are the people that I want to play with. What can I do with this? Let's jump into the 20s because this banjo has to fit in here somehow.
Correct. And that's, I think, also comes from there aren't very many people that we've met that are comfortable doing the thing that the band does.
Yes.
And so this kind of gets to kind of the way we think about the band, which is it's very predicated on the idea that if when we want to, we can play a rhythm changes in a way that like the guys at Smoke would be approving of.
Sure.
And then we can also crawl all over the drum set in a way that, you know, Lester Bowie and the art ensemble would be very approving of.
Yeah.
And there aren't actually that many people comfortable doing both of those things.
I've always been surprised at that, honestly.
Me too.
As growing up, I grew up north of Boston. In Boston, there's a thriving free improvisation scene. That's almost like a core part of the thing, but you get people like George Garzone and Bergonzi and people who can play whatever, who are comfortable playing in, you know, inside, outside stuff or whatever. But it's always been so funny to me that people who play, you know, there's a lot of people who play really inside music, but are pretty cautious about even Ornette, which, I mean, Shape of Jazz to Come came out in 1959.
Right.
And we're still a little uneasy about
right,
some
like,
of those.
oh man, I don't really play free
things.
stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, man,
he's
it's all
playing
the same.
melodies.
Yeah.
Every once in a while he squawks. Like, that's not weird. Yeah.
But to me, it's the same. It's all in the same spectrum. It's all part of the same thing.
Right. And I don't. There are, but like despite that, there aren't very many people who do that thing, and so we, in those first kind of like, you know, that first formative decade, we're all playing with other people, and you know, we would meet, insert name of amazing musician who's a good friend of ours here, that we would then get together to do just like a session and be like, all right, cool, let's play Bye Bye Blackbird, and it like wouldn't be killing in a Bye Bye Blackbird way. It's like, okay, so now let's play Free, and it would sound like great.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, but that's not the thing.
Right.
Or, you know, we'd play a standard session and someone would, you know, swing and sound amazing. And it's like, all right, cool, let's just like play Free for a while. And then it was like super imitative and like not that thing.
Yeah.
And so we'd played with Brandon a lot. And while Brandon Seabrook isn't like a jazz vocabulary guy, he's like a tonal versus atonal, and like he plays in, you know, traditional 1920s jazz bands doing like the quarter note splanky banjo thing. Sure. And then in his band, he runs himself through a distortion pedal and like shreds like a metal guitarist on banjo. Yeah. So it's like, right, that's the you know, like you can convincingly, you know, sound like Johnny St. Cyr playing with Armstrong, and then you can convincingly sound like the weirdest weirdo. Sure. Like that works. Yeah. And you know, Dave Taylor, you know, played with Duke Ellington, and he really just wants to make squawky noises on the trombone, you know, and like has been in the Mingus band since the 80s or what, you know, so
and knows but
right,
can live
but
in
like,
all those worlds.
Right. But is going to like do whatever he wants to do whenever he wants to do it, etc. And so, and then Ron is kind of like the ultimate version of that, where like, you know, stumbling across that guy was unbelievably amazing. So that's kind of like the core idea behind the, you know, as far as like my music, like that is what most of the other people do the killing does. Yeah. Where, you know, we need to be able to play, you know, Inner Urge like well, and then, you know, also be able to like, you know, sound like Cecil Taylor's band. Yeah. You know, in an equally convincing way. Yeah. And then everything in between. So that was kind of the way that band has always been thought of. Yeah. It's like, we need to be able to play, you know, like as free as possible for an entire night and have that be, you know, that could be its own thing. And we need to be able to like, you know, play a set of standards, you know, like we're the Joe Henderson band in like, you know, 1978. Yeah. And like, we're going to play Bye Bye Blackbird for this entire set, and it's going to swing the entire time. And we can also do that. Sure.
That's also a huge advantage in free music, because on the other side of the thing, I don't want to give straight ahead players too much of a hard time, but in free world, there's a lot of people too that, in my mind, free music means you have the opportunity to use everything. It's all there. But instead, sometimes we get into this world where it becomes its own cliche, where it's like, oh no, we only make sounds or whatever,
totally,
and you lose track of the fact that you have the opportunity to use all these other things.
There are arch conservative free improvisers out there who are just as bad or worse as the kind of Lincoln Center super conservative straight ahead. It's the same thing,
right?
Where that's music's 60 years old too, and we could go out and hear kind of self-purportedly experimental musicians doing the most cliched, predictable 1966 era free jazz that's just as full of vocabulary and cliches, and all right, now you're going to do that thing that's all right, the Pharoah Sanders octave jump, great, cool, check. Right, now you're going to sheets of sound train, yep, got it, cool. Weird multiphonics that kind of don't land like Ornette, great, checking off all the boxes. There'll be no time, check,
Sure.
So, there's a great tendency to kind of gravitate towards these very rigid, orthodox ways of playing, whether you're a free improvising musician or otherwise, doesn't really make any difference. It's many people gravitate towards one vocabulary and then stay there, but they're all just vocabularies. And so kind of I guess the central thesis of that band is we're going to do all these vocabularies equally well, and they're all on the table all the time. Yeah. And then go. Sure. And so that's the way, that band has always been. And that's kind of the impetus for me doing other bands now is all right, I'd like to not just do that thing. Sure. So I formed some other bands that are not mostly other people do the killing that do not do that thing.
Yeah. All with amazing names.
I think they have some good names. I'm happy with my names.
Yep. Yeah. Unspeakable Garbage.
Yep.
What else we got?
Acceleration Due to Gravity.
Yep.
And Advancing on a Wild Pitch.
Yeah. Where do those come from? Not to too much on the names.
So
the stories behind.
Yeah, not as good. So Advancing on a Wild Pitch is my, I call that my straight ahead band. We play forms and swing the entire time, and all of those people lived in Astoria for a while together. I mean, in the same neighborhood, and we're all kind of varying degrees of baseball fans.
Okay.
From rabid to very, very engaged.
Sure.
And so that's the baseball band. And Advancing on a Wild Pitch has been a band name kicking around in my head for years. And that was the correct name for that band.
Sure.
So then Unspeakable Garbage is my rock band. It's like an 80s rock band with no singer. And that band got named. We were trying to come up with a name, and they were all kind of artsy and dumb. And then we had a rehearsal at my old high school, maybe the second rehearsal we were doing of reading the tunes. And I was talking to the drummer Dan Monahan, and he's like, you got a drum set at the school? I'm like, yeah, but it's Unspeakable Garbage. And he's like, that's the name of the band. So he was playing on this terrible drum kit. And that just stuck. And at first we weren't convinced. And then we did our first gig in Philadelphia a few months later. And we were announced as that. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. That's correct. So, and then Acceleration Due to Gravity was kind of more of a conceptual title where the music for that band is cranked up to 11 at all times and never slows down and is kind of trying to be this perpetually accelerating thing. And it's a bigger band. And that was just that seemed like an appropriate. That's an appropriate name.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, yeah. Sure. I guess while we're on the name thing, now most of the tunes that you write for, maybe all of them, I'm not sure, are named after towns in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Are all of them?
About that? All of them. Since graduating from college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Impressive. I'm always, let's say, astounded.
Less impressive when you know how many towns there are in Pennsylvania.
It seems like an endless amount.
More than any other state in the union, I'll have you know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So you're not worried about running out of names of towns?
Unless I'm I go into a Bach level creativity phase.
I mean, you've written a lot of tunes.
It's a lot of tunes, but I'm still, not up to 200 even, and I got thousands. So Pennsylvania's got a lot of really stupid laws going back to the Revolution, and because of the way Pennsylvania is a commonwealth, much like Massachusetts.
Ah, yes.
And part of that has to do with incorporating a town in Pennsylvania is unbelievably easy.
Okay.
So it's basically if me and you bought some land in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, built houses there, we could name that a town and get it incorporated in a week. So
We might have to work on this.
Right.
Later
We
on.
could have a town in Pennsylvania by the end of the month, no problem. And so because of that, unlike most other states where there's like a town and then like a large area outside the town that is like, county jurisdiction or something like that,
Yeah.
pretty much any place anybody lives in Pennsylvania has a town name.
Okay.
So
Interesting. That's why there are so many
towns, and so many of the names are so stupid.
They're super wild.
Because you got to come up with new ones. So
Right.
you get some really weird names.
Yeah.
So having grown up there, I was aware of the number of ridiculous town names just from near where I grew up. And then kind of looking into that even a little bit more, it was like, man, this is like a endless well of stupid names. And then that ties into kind of another thing, thinking about music in general, like the naming of instrumental compositions has always struck me as pretty dumb.
Okay.
Because of the kind of inherent disconnect between any, logo-centric title and then like pure sound with no program. And so the issue has always been like, all right, so if I give a song a title, like what's that, Steve Swallow tune, like Journey to Recife or whatever, right? Now it's like you've implanted this idea in the audience's head, but you're going to play a jazz tune that like could be called literally anything else.
Okay.
And it would make no difference. Only now you've like pre-programmed the audience, and especially like less musically educated audience members, to think of it in this certain way. Like, oh yeah, we're going on a journey. And it's like, no, you're not. And if you are, why?
Sure.
And going back to like the 1800s and program music in general, like Creatures of Prometheus or whatever. It's just like it sounds the same if you call it like Raindrops and Sunbeams. Like nobody cares.
Sure, maybe. But you don't think there's any value in like?
Well, there is. So the value is like manipulative, though. So if I call this Journey to Recife, now everybody's thinking like we're on some journey, and that then is very limiting, I think, for improvisers, because now you're like tethered to this like programmed idea of what the song is about. And if spontaneously some other shit happens in the tune, which if you're playing jazz, it should.
Yeah, especially what you're doing.
Right. And like, you're not on Journey to Recife anymore. You're doing some other shit.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And so why'd you even call it that in the first place? And so if you're not going to have like a deliberate program where you're trying to like plant quasi-manipulative ideas in the audience's head before you play anything, just give them numbers. Works for Braxton. Or whatever. Or know that that's what you're doing and be upfront about it.
Sure.
But it's like it's a manipulative thing. And there's just been so many times when like, there'll be a tune that has some kind of evocative title and then you listen to it and it like has nothing, like that's maybe what it meant to whoever it was who wrote the tune. Or it's like super abstract. Like we were just listening to McCoy Tyner Extensions. What does extensions mean?
Right.
Like, are you talking about the chords? Whatever. You're just like shredding over some modal stuff, and it's awesome. You could have called this like the alphabet, or you could have called it like sunshine.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Sure. But even the Braxton thing, like to some degree, like if you call it piece 23J, that's its own. That's almost its own thing.
And he, from reading all his stuff, he's got a vast sea of nomenclature and ideas behind all those titles, which is awesome, and that's cool.
But you're saying it doesn't implant some image in somebody's head or something they have to follow.
But it still is going to have an effect. So then I was like, all right, I need to just pick something random to like name all the tunes after.
Okay.
And like I studied biology in college. I was like, I could just pick like bio terms. This one's called mitochondria, and this is called like whatever.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's dumb. And I was like, well, if it's going to be dumb, let's get like really dumb. And so Pennsylvania town names it is. And then that also then turned into an opportunity where I can like tell these like elaborate or ridiculous stories about these towns. And none of that has anything to do with the tune.
Sure.
But it like provides this narrative that's like a red herring.
Okay.
Like, here's a my current tunes are all about towns where like disasters have happened.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
So I'll
you
get up
about
on
that.
stage and I'll be like, all right, this is called Centralia, and Centralia is this town where there's this mine fire that's been going forever. It's burning underground and it'll never go out. Like, there's a great metaphor there. And then the tune is like the tune. It's some crap that I sat down and wrote at the piano. And I very much like that version of things where I'll like tell these, with a 7-piece band too, I'll tell these like elaborate stories about some of these towns. And then we're just playing a jazz tune. And like it's going to go wherever it goes and it does its thing. And I could have called it anything, but like I'll take these like, quirky town names as a way of dodging the whole program music thing.
Yeah. And
Like-
to let the audience decide
Right.
their adventure
This is
gonna
clearly
be.
not about a town in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So think of it what you will. But I'm going to tell you this funny story about Pennsylvania anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
And then that, it avoids the kind of game of cat and mouse that I hear people talk about all the time, where it's like, you'll play some like, here's, ballad for my significant other. And then you play like a ballad. It's like, oh, that was so sweet. And it's just like, we could have just played Misty, That's the same thing, like, are we really like, we're still just playing a song, and like, theoretically, maybe there's some emotional content or not. I could also sit down on the piano and write like a sappy ballad about nothing, and then tell you like, this is for my dog that died, and I'll be like, oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
But it's not, or maybe it is. It doesn't matter. Like, if you're actually listening to the thing as music, that shouldn't, like, that's only going to interfere. Like, you're just going to, like, program the audience to think a certain thing, and now you're going to hear this as, like, me writing this sweet song for my significant other, and you're not going to be really, like, paying attention to what's actually happening. Or you're going to, like, view it through that lens.
Yeah.
So even if we go off into left field and start, like, shredding or doing something, like, musically inappropriate,
Sure.
now, like, okay, are you now supposed to interpret that I don't like my significant other, and this is some, like, unconscious, like, angst? Like, no,
Sure.
we're, like, playing abstract music that, like, is going to mean something different to everybody, like,
Yeah.
just do that.
But do you think would that change if you were writing music that was much more, let's say, composed or specific, or in any regard, you want the audience to be free to interpret it to their free discretion?
I want the audience to be free, and like, not to Beethoven in 2020, which gets annoying, but like, Symphony Number 5 is fucking Symphony Number 5.
Sure, works.
Doesn't need a program. It's killing.
Yeah.
Symphony Number 9, it's got a program. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
the first 4 movements are badass. Like, even if you get rid of the last, and so it's just like,
Yeah.
we're also programmed that, like, right, we clearly don't need titles to, like, enjoy abstract music.
Yeah.
Or like, what's the Ornette record where all the titles are just initials? Is that Circle with the Hole in the Middle?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
They
like,
all mean something, but
they
it
all
doesn't
mean
matter
something,
what
but
it
I don't
is.
know what they mean.
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
read
yeah.
what they meant, and I stopped. Like, I didn't, like, it registered for like 30 seconds, and then I didn't care.
whatever.
Like, C and D is awesome.
Yeah,
Like,
right. Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
matter
yeah.
what that's about. It
Sure.
sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder about that. It's an interesting point for sure, and it's an age-old question: is
Right.
do we need to title these things or not? And there are certain things that, like, I love Anthony Braxton's music that doesn't need a title, and it conveys whatever it conveys, and I
Right.
can feel it or understand it or whatever.
Yep.
And then sometimes I'll listen to the Rite of Spring and be like, it's kind of cool that they're whatever this
Right.
the narrative was in that particular context.
Right. And in that context, the title is really just telling you something about the creative process. And I like to think that the Rite of Spring would be just as awesome if it was called, like, Ballet Number 2.
Sure. Yeah.
But knowing that, like, all right, this is a bunch of Russian dudes in Paris trying to be super edgy, and, like, that's how they got to this place, cool. And so the argument can be made either way, but I think it's just, like, because it can go either way, and the program side of things can be so manipulative, I'd rather just, like, steer clear of that altogether.
Yeah, especially with what you're doing. It sounds like because
Right.
you are going to make a left turn at any given
Gonna
moment.
make a left turn at any
and you
given
want to
point,
be prepared
so
for that.
right, yeah. So maybe let's just not pretend that we're not going to do that.
Right.
And yeah, like, just thinking about, like, classical composers' symphonies, they just have numbers,
Yeah,
and, like,
totally works.
it doesn't need more than that. Or like Gershwin preludes, doesn't need a title.
Sure.
Yeah, it's number 2.
Yeah.
Sounds great. you
Right.
know?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you clearly don't need to do that. And when you do it, it's going to be manipulative no matter what. So, make that decision up front, knowing that, like, even if you're trying, you might fail. Like, you can give it what you think is meaningful title, and then someone else hears it and, like, doesn't get that at all.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to bother, fine. But, like, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah.
So I got as you can see on the shelf right there, the yellow next to the Atlas of the World is the Atlas of Pennsylvania next to the speaker.
Oh, perfect.
And so I just, like, pull that sucker out and look at the map and pick a funny one and red tune.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. I was wondering about the title to This Is Our Music, and then I was looking through a map of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, rather, trying to book some gigs. And I was like, there it is.
Yep.
What a
That's
strange
not
name
far-
for a town.
Not far from where I grew up.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I have a good friend that grew up in music. So yeah, that one was a gimme. And Shamokin, like, there's a town called Shamokin. That's
Yeah,
hilarious.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's funny too because you pair it with all the recreations of the album covers. That's got to be fun to do that.
That was super fun. And I was telling Diana this story like a couple of days ago. We were talking about, like, the WBGO kind of, racial sensitivity trauma that's going on a little bit right now. And, Rashawn Roland Kirk's widow was working there for years, and I went and did an interview there for one of their shows with Ron. And the cover to 40 Fort is a recreation of Roy Haynes' Out of the Afternoon with Roland Kirk. So on the cover, Arabagon is like dressed exactly like Rashawn Roland Kirk in that picture. We spent all this time like tracking down the right clothes and blah, blah, blah.
That's amazing.
And she was like concerned.
Oh, really?
So she's like, yeah, like, why did you do that? And, so then we're just like, well, growing up, that was one of my favorite records. And we play jazz, but we're these like, conservatory trained, non-African American musicians who like have this weird relationship to that music, like through recordings and like this, kind of strange kind of hero worship. So that like when we play, we're like immediately aware of like the history of how we got to this point, but we don't want to be a historical recreation band. Like we don't want to like copy what, your late husband did, even though he's this massive influence.
Sure.
So we play this music that like takes that and like warps it into our own version, but then we like go home and listen to this record because it's one of our favorite records. So we wanted the cover to do the same thing. So we're like kind of taking on this like persona of, Roy Haynes and Tommy Flanagan, because that's kind of what we're doing musically. We're like, we're not this person, but we're like standing in this weird kind of, pod people.
Yeah.
We're like musical pod people. We're like, we can't actually ever be those people or play their music exactly. So we're trying to like come as close as we can, which creates this really weird juxtaposition.
Sure.
Because like, we don't want to insult our favorite music by just like doing the same thing over and over again, but we also don't want to, except sometimes, but we also don't want to just like, completely pretend that those are not our like massive influences. And so then she was like, that's real sweet. And, then
Nice.
like, I sat down at her desk and had this like, 45-minute conversation with her. And she's like one of the sweetest people I've ever met. But like, I think she was like, and rightfully so, worried that like, we kind of like thought it was silly or stupid.
Yeah, but
it's
really
like,
it's paying
it's like,
tribute to
no,
it.
like, that was my favorite record when I was like 11.
Yeah.
Like, I used to play that record all the time. Like, they played, some standards on there, and they're like, Kirk is doing his like multiple horns thing, and like 11-year-old me thought that was like the coolest thing I'd ever heard. So
Yeah.
Fly Me to the Moon is on that record.
Oh, yeah.
Kill on. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, right, like every time I play Fly Me to the Moon, I think of your husband doing that thing, and it's like the happiest shit ever.
Yeah.
But like, I don't want to actually do that. I want to do like my weird version of that tune.
Sure.
But like, one informs the other. So like, let's make the art do the same thing that the music does.
No doubt. Yep. All right. This is a perfect segue to.
Cool.
I remember when Blue came out,
Which
and
we were talking with Arabagon about that last night.
is that
Yep,
right?
Yep. Cool,
And it seemed like everybody came out of the woodworks to be furious, and I lived for that. I was thrilled.
Many people.
I thought it was
yeah.
amazing.
One of the best thing about it, and like kind of the intentional thing about it, was that it's like it is a litmus test. Because it is a vehicle for everyone to project whatever they already think about music onto it.
Yeah.
And, still today, when I like see people that I haven't seen or I meet people, everybody wants to talk to me about that. And that's great. That was the idea. It's like, it's a piece of art. It is not a piece of jazz. And every single person I've talked to has a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no two people I've talked to like think the same thing about it. Everyone's got a really strong opinion that is based on their kind of most core view of what music is and is not, whether they hate it or love it.
Yeah.
And then that's the thing they want to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's like, score. Like,
Yeah,
that
that's
was
exactly-
that was the
yeah.
entire point.
That's amazing.
Right,
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that you actually put so much time into meticulously recreating this thing.
Oh, it was a stupid
well.
amount of time.
It's
so dumb.
Is everybody on board? Like, did you have the idea as a reflection on the what was the origin of the idea here?
I think the origin was definitely me and Peter initially, and talking about like various dumb ideas. So it probably goes back to like early 2000s. And so on the first Mostly Other People record, which is like eponymous, our eponymous debut.
Mm-hmm.
We do Moanin' by Bobby Timmons. And Kevin and I start playing free, and Peter plays Lee Morgan's solo note for note in the chaos.
Nice.
And that sounds great. And then pretty shortly thereafter, in a different conversations, we weren't really thinking about that, but it was just like thinking about, the tendency in recent jazz to be very like historically tethered, and there's a right way to play and a wrong way to play, and so much of the kind of conservative straight ahead jazz establishment is very stuck on this. You should play like it is 1960 at all times and follow the very prescribed. It's just like, but if we do that, like, I mean, should we just like go back and like play this exactly the way those guys did? And then we're just like, what if we just like completely copied Kind of Blue, like exactly, like with. And so that was like a joke. We're like, it's hilarious. And then like, a couple of months later, we talk about it again, and it's like still funny, but like in a different way. And then like a couple years later, we're like still talking. Like, oh yeah, man, we should do that. And it was one of those. We have lots of stupid ideas, but that was one that like kept getting more interesting the more we thought about it.
Yeah.
And so eventually it was just like, no, we need to actually do this. Just because as we thought about it, just as a thought experiment, it kept opening up more and more doors.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, we should not just like think about this. We should actually do it. And we should do it like well. And so, we decided to like, yep, we're going to actually do this. Here we go. But then it took like years. So it was
to transcribe. Everybody transcribed all the individual parts, and
that part didn't take years. But I mean,
and then but learning it's pretty nuanced. Like Peter's got like some of the.
Oh, we got
Miles's. Like
it got
all
stupid. So okay, I can tell those stories. So in about 2010, we started transcribing it, and I spent a couple of months, because I wasn't like intensely doing it, just like writing out all the Paul Chambers bass lines, quarter note by quarter note, and like all the little grace notes and and it immediately starts this rabbit hole. So then it's like, okay, there are multiple CD masterings plus like original vinyl and whatever, and they all sound different.
Yeah.
And you can hear things on some recordings that you can't hear on others. And so we got to listen to like all the different versions. And so you check your transcription against a new mastering, and then you hear some shit in that one that you didn't hear in the first one. And so like that expands the rabbit hole.
Sure.
And then of everybody in the band, Arabagon is the most transcribe-y.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like how he learned how to play. He had a teacher early on who was just like, you need to transcribe. And he's like a transcribing maniac. And so as an alto player, he kind of self-admittedly tried to stay as far away from Cannonball Adderley as he could. Just like, that's a super weighty part of the music history.
Yeah.
It's like, if you play alto saxophone, you're going to play bebop, and you're not going to play like Charlie Parker, and then like, you have to confront Cannonball one way or another. Like, because that's how you fucking do that.
Yeah.
And John was like, I'm going to not sound like Cannonball. So John had like, all through college and grad school 1 and grad school 2 up through Juilliard and all that stuff, been trying to like not sound like Cannonball, which he was very successful at. John does not sound like Cannonball. So now it's like, cool, not only do you need to sound like Cannonball, you need to sound as convincingly like Cannonball as you possibly can. So he's like, shit. So being John, he transcribed every single Cannonball Adderley solo with the Miles Davis band before Kind of Blue, before he transcribed any Kind of Blue.
Wow.
So he went to the entire canon, and just all the Cannonball there was, he transcribed. Then he did Kind of Blue. Then I don't remember whether he rented or borrowed the exact same model saxophone that Cannonball played. And then he tracked down the exact same mouthpiece. And his Cannonball stuff is like insanely convincing on that record. And over the course of the process, we had to go back and scrap all the original. We did a series of sessions in the first year, and then wound up not using any of it except the alto stuff.
Really?
And so on the record, everything is from a later recording session. Like the alto on the actual record was recorded a year before everything else. And as we were like having to go back and redo it, John was like, I'm not redoing the alto. Like, I'm never going to get it better. That's what we use. So the alto stuff is taken from a completely different studio, different day, different year group of sessions. Wow. And then everything else got re-recorded.
How did you do that?
What
was the recording process?
We were doing everything isolated. Well, we didn't know because, like, we started this very haphazardly and had no idea what we were doing. So we knew we were going to have to individually do the horns because John was doing train and canon.
Right.
So that's not possible.
Yeah.
So we were going to okay, so we got to do the rhythm section. And initially we were doing the rhythm section stuff kind of piece by piece, and that didn't work. And we also, switched piano players. Like, Ron came in, halfway through the process.
Uh-huh.
And so what we wound up doing for the rhythm section is once we had all the transcriptions done, one of the tricks is, it's live music and it's good. So the tempos don't hold.
Yeah.
Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers, rush and drag a lot in various places.
Sure.
So we tried, programming a click track, beat by beat through the entire record, so that we could, play to that click. But
that would follow the motion?
Yeah. So,
Impressive.
Following the original beat by beat. That took a long time.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. So we did that. And then we tried playing with that, and that didn't really work because so much of the phrasing doesn't actually follow where the ictus of the beat is.
Sure.
So what we finally wound up doing was we're in the studio. We set up in the exact configuration because all kinds of pictures from that session. We set up exactly the same distance from each other at all the same angles with all the same microphones. And then we put on headphones, and in the headphones we had each other plus the original recording plus the click.
Okay.
And the problem there was the original recording is out of tune.
Yeah.
And so we had to record to that in order to get the tempos right and yada, yada, yada. So in our headphones, we were hearing a click track that kind of lines up with every beat, the original recording so that we could hear where one or more people was slightly off to the beat.
Which is out of tune.
Which is also out of tune on half the tracks.
Okay.
Only. And then hearing each other in real time.
Yeah.
So it was super chaotic and dense and difficult, and that took a bunch of sessions.
Yeah.
So then we
unreal,
had,
honestly.
right.
That's crazy.
So then we had that done, and then we left the setup, and Peter and John came into the studio with because while we were recording the rhythm section, we also had the horn mics set up and live because there's going to be
so you can hear that, right.
Right. So then we had John and Peter come in with all the other mics still on and in place, and they recorded their parts in the same room with the same configuration for the tenor parts and the trumpet parts. And then we, flew in the alto parts from the other session and mixed them down because the horn parts were always playing along with the original recording in their ear.
Okay.
Along with the rhythm section.
So it works, yeah.
Right. And it doesn't totally work. One of the best criticisms we got of that was level-headed and nuanced was Ethan Iverson.
Okay.
Who wrote a big blog post about it, and he was like, the biggest problem with it is it doesn't swing. And I was like, you're right.
Interesting.
And it's just because there's so many cooks in the kitchen that the way swing works is that there's this agreed upon center of the beat that then everyone is smearing a little bit.
Yeah.
And because especially Kevin and I were hearing so many simultaneous notes, it's not just the two of us playing, it's four people playing. And
right.
Since we're kind of playing this weird game of cat and mouse, both with each other and with Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers, very often, it doesn't lock up the way the original locks up. Because, we're playing cat and mouse with them, and we're talking fractions of milliseconds in difference in attack.
Sure.
But, that's the difference between swinging and not swinging.
Right.
And so, the biggest tell, if you put it on the tracks that swing, so your Freddie Freeloader and your, mainly Freddie Freeloader, is it we don't swing very hard, if at all, at times, just because of the way we did the process.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like you've put yourself in as being experiments in that world. That's something that you can get out of, all right, what does it mean if you try to recreate something exactly what is swing? This all has to do with being in the moment and being spontaneous, which you can't get if you've got a drum machine. You can't get if you're,
right.
Trying to stick to the
swing
specifics of whatever.
Yeah, swing is based on there's this, actually steady beat at the center that then everyone is ignoring, tactically ignoring.
Yeah.
so that things are a little ahead or a little behind by just the right amount that's not really notatable
Right.
and has to be felt. And when you're doing this like very elaborate studio setup, I mean, again, if we had spent another like several years on it, we probably would have been able to get it a little better. But like, you got to draw a line in the sand and be like,
Sounds like
fuck it, that's as good as we can get. Like, that's where
right.
we're at.
You already went the distance
Right.
on that.
And so on the tunes that don't swing in that way, so like Blue and Green and Flamenco Sketches, I think are a lot more convincing in our recreation because that tell isn't as prevalent.
Sure.
Like with those. I did a radio interview when it came out with Kurt Gottschalk, and he was like, playing, A-B'ing them on the radio, and he played Blue and Green, and I was like, through these headphones, like, I can't tell if this is us or them.
That's pretty amazing.
Like, because, it's like, realistically, I've probably listened to that record more than any other human, and
right.
you get down into that thing where, like, you're listening to certain aspects of the sound, and it's like, we all had the experience of, like, A being our version with the other version when we were doing mixes and being like, man, on this, like, it just doesn't, like, the piano just doesn't sound right. And then, like, realizing we were listening to the original. It's like, God damn it. Okay, switch them again then, I guess. Fuck, because when you're so far in there, you just, like, you lose track of reality and, like, we stop being able to tell which was which after a while when you're focusing in on getting the right reverb on the piano on this like one exposed note or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
Okay, play the original again. Okay, now play ours. All right, back again. All right, cool. Yeah, raise that up a little bit. Oh, wait, they were switched? Like, shit, I don't know. Like, just leave it how it is.
It's a little bit like that. I mean, mixing anything to some degree, you listen to the stuff enough, you go, well, we need to bring up the highs in this place, and then a little more reverb. Then after a while, it becomes mathematics anyway. I don't know how people do it.
Exactly. You draw a line in the sand. Like, that is good enough.
Yeah,
like,
cool. That's going to work.
Get.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of, and that becomes really interesting. And then, like, kind of, if it's a litmus test for everybody, the litmus test is that the most interesting stuff are all the things about it that we couldn't copy. And so
okay, like what?
So
the swing is one of them.
Well, the swing is a feel thing, and that like gets to a core thing about like playing in a rhythm section and what playing in a rhythm section means, and how bass player and drummer's job is to reach a consensus. And like when that consensus gets met is where you get when things groove, and it just like there's a uniform feel of how we are articulating both the beat and the swing and the subdivisions that is now agreed upon, and there's you get this flow. Yeah. That is a thing that when kind of jazz musicians criticized like 60s rock musicians, that was a valid criticism, where like if you have like a very square 4-on-the-4 beat and everyone's like trying to be really precise and it's just eighth notes, that doesn't groove really. Sure. So there's that like that's the minutia you can't copy. Mm-hmm. Like, I will never be Paul Chambers, and Kevin will never be Jimmy Cobb. And because we are not those humans, we will reach a different consensus. So when Kevin and I groove, there's a 0% chance it will ever be the same as those two guys. Sure. Yeah. But we're going to try. Yeah. And as you get closer and closer, the differences get magnified. Because it's like, it's so close that it's like the uncanny valley thing. Like, it's more wrong the closer it gets. Because it brings out all that stuff where it's just like, right, like, I don't know why, but like, that note's wrong. It's like, but it's not wrong. Yeah. We can see it's not wrong, but it sounds wrong. Sounds wrong. Yeah. And like, the reason why it sounds wrong is music. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so then we were having this conversation with Rabagon last night where, John doesn't sound like Coltrane. Shocker. Yeah. And even when John is trying as hard as he fucking can to sound like Coltrane, so like he was playing on the same model saxophone because like I think it's like a Mark 6 or something, and everybody's got a Mark 6 tenor, so that's not weird. Yeah. And then he like tracked down the same mouthpiece, and that's not hard. Everybody's been copying Train's fucking mouthpiece for the last like 60 years, right? But it's just like look really close listening to Train's sound. Like, in a given note that Train plays, there's like a upper mid-range hole. Like, there's a frequency range that is just missing in Coltrane sound. And it's like, it gives him this, like, that hollowness that, like, we can all immediately recognize, right, that's Train, we know what that is. Yeah. And, like, kind of really deeply listening to that is like there's this gap that like because of Coltrane's teeth and throat and tongue and pharynx,
Sure.
those overtones don't come out of the horn, and he gets that like kind of that Coltrane-y sound.
Yeah.
John doesn't have that. There's a gap in John's sound that's like lower in the frequency spectrum, and so we spent an entire day EQing John's tenor playing to like put the frequency, amplify the frequencies in John's sound that are usually not there, and then cut out the frequencies that are missing in Train, and you still can't do it.
Yeah.
It still doesn't sound like Train.
Yeah.
And then same thing with Peter and Miles's thing, trying to copy the mouthpiece and like like all the articulation stuff, and it's just like you can't.
So personal
Right.
to every
And then it's like, right, that's why jazz is awesome.
That's exactly
like you listen to Miles because Miles plays one note and no other trumpet player sounds like that.
Yeah.
And nobody sounds like Train and nobody sounds like Cannon.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's the thing that like we all try and cultivate, which is you want a personal sound.
Right.
And that's really hard to do. And those three guys happen to be three of the most instantly identifiable sonic people in history.
Yeah.
And so to try really brings out, it's like, that sounds like Train, but not.
Yeah.
And it's like, right, because like it's missing Train.
Right, exactly.
Everything else is right.
Yeah.
It's just not Train.
Yeah.
And like that sounds like Miles, but like it's just not thin enough here and not thick enough there, and the harmon mute just doesn't quite sound right. It's like, right, because he's not Miles.
Right.
And it's like even if he'd had a heroin habit and kicked it and then like lost a bunch of weight and like messed up his voice box, like it's still not Miles. It's
Yeah.
like Peter with a fucked up voice and a former heroin habit.
Right, yeah. Probably wouldn't be worth that.
Probably
I'm glad
wouldn't
you
be
didn't go
worth
the
it.
full distance on
Right,
that, recreating the album. Peter,
Right.
I'm sorry to tell you, man, but
Right.
we're going to have to.
Yeah.
Gonna take a
We're gonna have to
different
go.
direction on
Yeah,
this.
more. Yeah, in a different direction. Here's a syringe.
Yeah, right.
Then you're gonna need to go to a farm in Missouri to kick the habit.
It's going to be hard.
It's gonna be hard.
Yeah.
But trust me, it'll work out. So,
Yeah, but it speaks to the individual nature of the thing so well, because I mean I always make the comparison like or the point, like you listen to Coltrane play Body and Soul, you can hear in an instant it's going to be different than Coleman Hawkins playing Body and Soul.
Right.
But you guys are literally trying to create the exact same thing and you still can't do it.
Right.
Which really it speaks to how cool the whole thing is, that it's everyone in an ideal circumstance is instantly identifiable or has their own personality and that can't be reproduced regardless.
Right. And those are the things that anyway, this is my own litmus test. Those are the things that I find most interesting about music generally.
Yeah.
It's like now that we have conservatories churning out like, super trained musicians all day, like notes are everybody can play a bunch of notes. We can all play the same notes if we want to, so that doesn't matter. And like
Sure.
now tons and tons of people can like convincingly swing. Whereas like, we were talking earlier this morning about how like these Blue Note records from the 60s, man, it's like it's all the same guys. It's like, oh right, there were only like 30 people on Earth that could do that. And they all lived here. And even we're talking about like, personalities, and like McCoy Tyner, who's this very like soft-spoken, gentle, you don't hear stories about him being like a drunk, drug addict, womanizing guy. And here he is on a record with Lee Morgan, who like just got his teeth kicked out by a drug dealer.
Right.
So like, I can't imagine those guys being super tight. Maybe they were, but like, if Freddie Hubbard's busy, it's Lee Morgan. And
Right,
like,
yeah.
Because Woody Shaw's not old enough yet.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
that's it. Like, there is no other trumpet player around that could like do that gig.
Sure.
Because it's like, right, like in this world, there's like 4 people that can do this. And now we could probably get on our phones and find 400 trumpet players that could convincingly play some like 1960s hard bop.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah,
yeah.
like I could find 400 bass players that could do what like Ron Carter does on that record. Like competently well. And so like that being like a huge difference. So now that we can all play whatever notes we want to play and we can all swing, it's just like none of that is like what makes music on a core level kind of interesting. It's like all these little non-notatable nuances that we all bring in that's like, even taking like modern people, like we were listening to like some Chris Potter the other night. It's like nobody sounds like that, like he's maybe shreddier than most people, but like a Chris Potter shredding solo and a Michael Brecker shredding solo are equally shredding, but they do not sound anything alike.
Right,
like,
exactly.
those people have like totally different sounds, and they bring in like Mark Shim, like totally different thing, and like whoever else.
Yeah, and that's the ideal.
Right. And so it's like you're trying to get to a point where those are the things that matter. And I think that, like, for me anyway, the Kind of Blue thing is like, that's what is front and center. Like, the things that are different between this and the original are the things that actually matter. And we can all transcribe a bunch of notes, but like, that's not really music.
Sure.
Like, all the other stuff is what actually matters, but nobody talks about that. You know, it's like, we talk about like transcribing notes and like what pentatonic like we're playing.
Yeah,
nobody
right.
cares.
Yeah. Did you find that people responded to that the way that you expected them to respond to the album? Like, did you have any expectations, or were you trying to like troll people, kind of, or like?
No,
or did you have...
well, because there were just as many like positive responses and negative responses, and the thing that was interesting is like everybody has their own take.
Yeah.
And so the only kind of shocking response, and I said this at the time in a bunch of interviews, and I'll say it forever, I was blown away by how many offended people were offended because they thought we were doing it for money.
Interesting.
Like, oh, right, this is just like, a bunch of like, white kids, and I don't know what Arabigan is, to like, make a bunch of money like ripping off the masters. And it's like, do you have any idea how the economy works now?
Right.
Like, I spent so much money making that. Like, I won't even get within $10,000 close to making my money back.
Yeah,
like,
right.
I lost 20 grand making that record that I will never, like, I would have to sell, millions of copies, which I won't do.
Right.
Like,
nobody's selling millions of copies.
No one's, like, we sold like 2,000 copies of that.
Yeah.
Which made back 15%
right.
of the money I put in.
Yeah.
It's like,
people don't realize that at all about
people
the
don't realize
music
that
world,
at all, because you think like, well, Kind of Blue has made millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's like many times platinum record. Like,
right.
You forget that like, that doesn't happen to anybody else.
Correct.
Except for maybe now like A Love Supreme and like 2 or 3 other records.
Yeah, that are old, that are
right, that
guess.
have been in print for decades.
Right, but you can't sell. I mean, nobody's buying.
Nobody buys CDs anymore.
Right.
Period. And then kind of like assuming that would be a motivation to do something like that was shocking. So like when people were just like, oh yeah, this is like clearly about money, like that's messed up.
Yeah.
It's just like, there are lots of avenues to criticize this that I'm very open to taking criticism to. But it's like, to think that I'm doing this for money, like, actually kind of pisses me off. Because it's just like, that is not what's happening here.
Right.
So be as mad as you want. I'm totally cool with that. That's kind of part of the point. Not the entire point, but like...
You have to be open to that. That's what art is. That's
right,
what art's all about.
If this makes you mad, I hope that you think about why.
Right.
You know, like, and because that would be a really interesting vein to mine.
Yeah.
So I was totally cool with all that, but like the whole "you think I'm making money" is like, you're just wrong.
Right.
You know, so
it's
like,
also insulting if if you're looking at your bank account, you're like,
right.
No.
Yeah, like I spent years and dropped like, we have like an entire year's worth of recording sessions we didn't even use that I paid for.
Right. Never mind the amount of time and
money.
meticulous
Yeah, it's like,
effort.
I will never make that money back. You know, like ever.
Sure. Right.
It was a really, really expensive joke.
Right. Yeah.
And like, and that's great. And if it was just a really expensive joke, we wouldn't have done it. But it was like, it was a really expensive piece of art that was designed to get people to think about music, which it did.
Right. It reminded me, not in form at all, but when I remember being in maybe late high school, early college, and I was really into Dadaism, but I recognized that if you draw a mustache on a postcard of the Mona Lisa, or you draw like some initials on a urinal, that's not the same thing as carving a statue out of marble or whatever, but I sort of liked them the same. Right. And I always said to myself, like, what is it about this that is so compelling to me? And when I realized it's the question itself. It's like the way that you interpret it. Is this art, or what even is this?
And discuss.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing. I mean, that's what makes something art, and not just because... people, as an example, like people take photographs all the time. I was thinking about it. I was like, what's the difference between just any idiot with a camera taking a picture of whatever and an art? Where sometimes you see a photograph and you're like, okay, that's art. I get it. But it has to do with the interpretation of the person who's viewing the thing.
All kinds, all those externalities. And, because that's where, one of the things about it was like, right, so if I, play this on the radio and somebody can't tell the difference because, they're not, like, hyper attuned to those differences, like, does that make them an idiot? Like, it's not a trick. It's just like sound art does weird stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is there are enough weird angles that you can approach this, kind of infinite weird angles you can approach this, and like project your stuff onto it that makes it interesting.
Sure.
So I also I remember one of the in the melee happening when that record came out, Rachel Z just like cold called me, basically being like, why did you do this? And I didn't know her, but like she just wanted to talk about it. And like she'd been talking to like Lenny White or somebody, and like they were just like, yeah, it's like they kind of wanted to, they thought that they knew what we were doing, but kind of wanted to check.
Yeah.
And then she kind of got on her soapbox. She was like a little offended. It's fine. And her angle, which I thought was something I'd never even thought of.
Mm-hmm.
She's really huge on like apprenticeship.
Okay.
And so like, she apprenticed with Wayne, and, Lenny White apprenticing with Miles, and like stuff, blah, blah, blah. And that as being this like, you can go to school for jazz, but if this is this oral tradition, the apprenticeship model is like very different in jazz than it is in other forms of music.
Mm-hmm.
And this like transmitting knowledge from one generation to another, person to person.
Yeah.
And a lot of that in the Jazz Academy is like lost.
Sure.
So now you can go to the University of whatever and major in jazz and study with a bunch of people that have PhDs that like, never made noteworthy recordings, and kind of like graduate and become a professional musician having never apprenticed.
Yeah. Okay.
But then she's like, and so in a way, like recordings become the masters with whom you apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we can't apprentice with Miles and Train and Cannonball,
right,
but we can apprentice with this record.
Uh-huh.
And so her whole thing was that like she viewed it as this like, document about like the loss of apprenticeship, and like where these like young musicians like floundering, and like we can't get the thing that we need, so we find it in this like weird backwards like way.
Yeah.
I was like, I mean, sure. Like that's a great take.
Yeah.
Like, no, but
cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
That is your thing.
Sure.
Run with that. And that was like a really great conversation, just because it was like, right, yeah, I don't think about that at all, because I was lucky enough to get to apprentice with people.
Sure.
Like during and after college.
Mm-hmm.
But like, oh right, like not everybody gets that chance. And that is like, I did learn as much or more playing in older musicians' bands as I did being in college.
Sure.
And so it's like, all right, yeah, I totally see your point. I would definitely not be where I am today had I not been apprenticed by 50, 60, 70-year-old jazz masters when I was like 20.
Yeah.
And like, and that's a interesting point, but that was not something I was thinking about at all, because that's like not my angle.
Right.
But it's like, that is your angle.
Yeah.
Like, now I know how your brain works.
Yeah.
Like,
but again, it's a reflection on each individual, whatever they take from that experience.
Right. And that's what she took from it. And I thought that was like one of the first, like, oh, right, everybody's going to have their own take.
Yeah.
Cool. Like,
you know what? Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because it seems like that record is a complete departure from the other stuff that you
totally.
did.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's totally in line with the philosophy of, all right, we're going to name these after towns in Philadelphia and let people fill in the gaps as they are. Like, it seems to all, like, everything you're doing seems to have that, all right, you can interpret this in your own way. You can reflect on this however you want. And that falls in line with that completely, even though it's a completely different approach.
There's another angle that I had not considered, even like 6 years later. So yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I never thought about that at all, but yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah, it is essentially the same thing in that way. Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the Bobby angle.
There you go.
Yeah,
who
got
knows?
it.
I don't know.
That's a really good one. Yeah, like that's not one that I've talked about before. So yeah, it's really good. And yeah, I think that like that was another kind of like Ethan Iverson signing off, it was just like, right, this is like not really jazz. It's like conceptual art.
Yeah.
And it's a piece of like jazz conceptual art. So, you're not going to listen to this to like hear it. Like no one should ever like listen to that for like, because they want to listen to that. You should listen to fucking Kind of Blue. It's better. But it exists to like be heard as this other thing in the same way that like, Duchamp's urinal exists to like force you to reconsider how sculpture works.
Right.
It's like, here's a smooth marble surface that is very well crafted, much like Michelangelo's David.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
Like, is it different? How? Oh, do go on.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. If I'm an alien, that's some white rock and that's some white rock, and they're both smooth and shiny.
Yeah.
Like, next.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, they're different. Cool. How?
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it still happens, you know, like every place I go, like I get into this conversation. It's great and people want to talk about it. And like, hopefully that will be, you know, I'm fine with that being like my legacy. As many people have pointed out, like, you know, you're going to be the kind of blue guy now, like forever. And it's like, cool. Like, you know, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Well,
like,
it was just a part of it, you know, but
you know, hopefully they hear some other music I made, but maybe not. Like,
yeah.
You know, it's fine.
Have you found that people have gone from that? Like, has that sent people in the direction of the other
I don't know. I mean, if you're the kind of person that hears the kind of blue thing and like thinks we're like a normal jazz band and then like, you know, puts on Shamokin, you're going to be very confused. So
it's kind of part of the thing. I was surprised. I was like, man, I can't believe you got Kevin Shea to, you know, manage to stick to, you know, like tame. You know,
of everybody in the band, like Kevin had to go the farthest.
I almost was just waiting. You know, you listen.
Yeah,
to
you're waiting for Kevin to do Kevin.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like he doesn't get to.
Yeah.
He was super uncomfortable. Yeah. But yeah,
funny.
it's just like, yeah, for people that know Kevin's playing, hearing Kevin do that is like unbelievably shocking.
Yeah,
I think it's,
even more shocking than his playing.
I think it's way more shocking than anything else about that record is like Kevin playing fairly evenly displaced quarter notes. Like
Yeah.
that never happens.
Yeah, but it speaks to the point that that people in the group are able to switch back and forth or
Right.
have that full vocabulary or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Kevin's virtuosity is insane.
Yeah.
And he is violently philosophically opposed to playing straight time
Is that right?
for ways that he will expound at length.
I'll ask him about it.
So
next time I
right,
see him.
so forcing him to do that made him very uncomfortable, but he was on board with like the larger thing, and you know, kind of grumblingly like he's, you know, his transcriptions are like ridiculously detailed.
Sure.
You know, page after page after page of like Jimmy Cobb time with like feathered triplets, like meticulously notated. It
Yeah.
was nuts. I mean, like, you know, you'd have 9 sheets of music paper like taped together on like 4 stands in front of him that he's like reading off of.
Yeah.
It's bananas. But
That's
it's like
wild.
looking at it, it's like, yeah, that is exactly what Jimmy Cobb plays right there.
Right.
Like, you know, you nailed it.
Wow. that's
Also,
amazing.
in fun facts, Jimmy Cobb had a 4-piece drum set set up in the studio. He plays the floor tom once and the rack tom 0 times on Kinda Blue. Like, so they set it up and mic'd it. He never played the rack tom.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Huh?
on that entire record.
Could
There's
be. You might want that little resonance from the whatever.
Yeah, well, it was there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we actually had the exact same drum set. So we got like the same model drum set.
Oh wow.
So yeah, we matched the cymbals. It's there.
Yeah.
He doesn't play it.
That's funny.
great.
I'm gonna go back and listen to find that one floor tom.
Yep. Yeah. It's great. It's, you know, when he does it, it's real obvious. But it's like, you know, all the fills and chatter are like snare drum stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Which is killer. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like the Jimmy Cobb sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So these days you're doing mostly trio. Is it
Most
is
of
it
the
all
people
trio? Or
is now
most
a
of the other
trio.
people
Yeah,
filling? Because
right.
now you have the other groups you're doing just going off in different directions.
Other
trying
bands to
different
do other
things, and-
stuff. Most
Yeah.
of the other people is a trio with me and Kevin and Ron Stabinsky.
Yeah, and that was the last record.
That was the last record, Paint.
Paint.
Yeah.
And that was that's sort of like almost like as a concept, that's kind of a straight ahead trio,
a modern
piano
jazz trio
record,
Right.
taken in your own directions.
Right. And so I wrote a bunch of, that was when I was trying to very definitively write like post-bop tunes, but like now I've got a piano.
Yeah.
So chords with extensions and that whole thing.
Sure.
And I think as a record, I'm pretty happy with that. Only 1 or 2 tunes from that record has made it into the live book that we will go into. But that record does, you know, it's kind of like the 4th or 5th in that like series of concept records.
Yeah. And that's what you were thinking about is
Yeah.
the piano trio.
It's like,
thing.
all right, this is going to be like a long lost early 70s, you know, modern jazz piano trio record that, you know, never got made.
Yeah.
You know, right.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that was the trajectory for doing the trio now, or you do it was that
Right.
that concept.
Right. So it was kind of like the original quartet, you know, went for a while. Then we kind of added Ron, and then Ron was in and out of the band depending on the project, you know, post Kinda Blue. Then we had like the 7-piece version of the band, and that was what was touring for a while. And then Peter left the band just because, and the band has like a lot of like, you know, notoriety, infamy, baggage. And Peter in his career was trying to like distance himself from that baggage in a way that like, you know, he wanted to like not play in the band. And you know, after living with that guy and like, you know, closest friends for 20 years. So it's like, right, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And so Steve Bernstein stepped in to play, and he's the perfect sub for the 7-piece band, 1920s and 30s stuff.
Yep.
That's the guy. So that was fine. And then the small group then became a quartet with piano and John. And then John kind of felt similarly, was like, right, like I don't want to play in this version of the band anymore. So then John was only playing in the 7-piece. And now, John is not playing with that either because now Brian is. And it kind of, then it was like, all right, so I guess now we're a trio. What would be, this is like, now I've got totally different vocabulary to play with.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, now I'm going to write a trio record. And so that was very kind of like newly motivating because it like changed the parts. Mm-hmm. And like between the smooth jazz record and the 7-piece band, I've been trying to do that in a bunch of different ways. And then like changing the instrumentation's another way to do that.
Sure.
So rather than finding a replacement saxophone player or finding a small group replacement trumpet player, it was like, no. I've already done that thing.
Yeah.
Now let's do this trio and see where the trio goes.
Yeah.
And so in the tours with the trio, all kinds of new versions of the same thing have now opened up because Ron can do anything. And it kind of allows there to be more space for me to do more things. Because in the quartet version, I kind of did some Ron Carter-y. I'm the one that's the most staying home.
Yeah.
And let everything else kind of swirl around. And then when I didn't do that, it was very like jarring, which good trick. But now with the trio, I have a lot more room to like not just be bass player. And so it's opened up like more new doors now that it's a trio.
Sure.
So we're going to record a new trio record next month.
Oh, cool.
Of the Disaster tunes.
Oh, great. Okay.
And so looking forward to that. And so I have like a new book of tunes that are kind of getting back to, pretty bluesy and pretty melodically and harmonically simple, so that we can go in and out of sections and do our thing, and then doing like other arrangements of those tunes that don't do that. Kind of trying to write really malleable songs at this point.
Yep.
And that's been like since, I don't know, the summer-ish. Like starting last summer, it was like, all right, writing this new book of tunes, they're going to be, getting back to the melodic and harmonic, classic jazz simplicity, so that then I can give them to different bands to play, and we can, explore more of the trio version of jumping in and out of things that are very comfortable.
Sure.
Which has been really fun. Like the recent gigs have been really fun. The interplay between the trio is really great. Mm-hmm. And then I can do with the straight ahead quintet versions of that. I'll probably write, versions of some of those things for the 9-piece band and maybe for the 7-piece band, and just kind of like, use the same material in different ways. Yeah.
And I imagine that you learn something about how the tunes work in each individual context as you play them with different groups.
Right. So even, like last month, like when the trio plays some of those songs, it's a completely different version than when, like a 2-horn quintet plays those songs. And like different parts of the tune become the core thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's been interesting to check out.
Yeah. How much do you tour? Like when
Less
you
now.
Release an album.
Yeah, I always hated touring. I don't like it.
It's a drag.
It's a drag, man. And I kind of came to that conclusion back in like 2003, where after college I'd been like kind of playing full time, and then I moved here and was playing full time, and the touring part, and even just like the day-to-day hustling for gigs that I didn't really want to play, or like, having to do like wedding band stuff, or like, standards in a restaurant for a bunch of money, but like it's, no one's paying any attention, and like the music's not very good. I was like, I don't need this. This is making me dark.
Yeah.
So that's why
I think a lot of people get
many
into that.
people, I think I got darker faster than most. And so I was like, I need to not do this. So I started teaching instead, and then I only like play with my own bands or things that, with friends and friends projects that I like enjoy.
Yeah. It gives you the flexibility to choose whatever you want to do.
Right.
And, not
and
feel
then,
like you're gonna...
right. And then most of the people kind of won the jazz lottery like 10 years ago, where, we just like, there's 40 or 50 bands in New York that are, just as good as we were. I was in some of them, but for whatever reason, probably partly personnel and then partly just like sheer luck, we got to go to some European festivals, and some people at European festivals heard us and were like, we want you to do tours. So for like, a good 6 or 7 years, we were, whenever I had a break in school, we would go do like a, 9-day tour in Europe. So we'd like, take a week in the fall and then a week in February and then a week in April. And so we were doing like, and then summer festivals. And so like 2009 to like 2015 or 14, that was like, 3 tours. And like every one of those tours, it'd get to be like Wednesday. And I would just like hate it. And like we found ways to like, make it fun. And like as a result, it was like, a lot of energy went into making sure that it was fun.
Yeah.
And then kind of like in touring with other bands that isn't the case, it became more and more evident that like, okay, this is like probably as good as touring is going to get. Like, 2011, 12, 13 were like super heavy years and we were like having a great time and like doing this whole thing, but it was like, man, I would not do this with like another band. And this is only fun because we're doing like going out of our way to do stupid crap every town we're in.
Yeah.
And so kind of over the years, I was just like, yeah, I don't really like the touring part.
Yeah.
And kind of over the last couple of years, I just like I'm doing it less. And so, yeah, when we did Paint, I didn't go out of my way to try and tour with that really at all. Like we did some stuff here in the States, but like very just like easy and that was that. And like, we'll still go over and play like festivals from time to time. But even that, like the sending out all the emails to make that stuff happen, it's just like, this sucks. Like I don't need this.
Yeah.
So I'll probably I'm going to do some of that because I do like performing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very comfortable not doing as much of that as I used to.
Sure.
And kind of I don't have this, oh man, I got to work really hard and put out some stuff that's like, gets a bunch of press so that I can like get a bunch. It's like, no, I'm just going to do whatever I'm going to do. And if I, do a tour a year, that'll be great.
Sure.
And like, even that, I'll be like kind of dark about having to like put together, but like that's about where I'm at.
Yeah.
Sure. Litmus test wise. So we did like a couple of, like a short thing in Europe this summer. I guess like in the last year there was like 1 or 2 other, festival-y things. And like, that's plenty. I'm not going to hustle for that. I'm perfectly fine kind of doing stuff here in the Northeast. And then when an album comes out, trying to get like a festival or 2 and like, that'll be plenty.
Yeah.
But like I only got to do that in the first place, through luck,
Well, what does that mean? Like, what was the foundation? Like, did you seek it? You didn't seek it out. I mean, like, how
seek
did
it
you
out.
fall
like,
into
we were
that
just like
world?
doing what we did. I was like booking tours in the States where we'd just like, play Philly and Pittsburgh and Chicago and Cleveland. And like, that was going for like years.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got an invite to a festival in Europe in summer, like spring 2009. And that was like the first like overseas gig we did. We did 1 gig and then some kind of like associated workshops and stuff. And a bunch of people were at that festival who then like booked tours for the band, going forward. And that was all right around the time that like 40 Fort had just come out and we were working on the Smooth Jazz record. And then the Smooth Jazz record came out and was like weird enough that part of the way you get to tour is like through having these like novel concept-y things. And so that happened and there were like 2 years of touring with that. And then the Kind of Blue thing happened, and we obviously weren't going to tour with that. But, that like led to a whole bunch of like, okay, so we toured playing our normal music, and then the 7-piece happened, and festivals wanted to have the 7-piece. So that happened a little bit. And I was, then it becomes the game where it's like, all right, am I going to like every 2 years try and come up with some like marketable novel thing, which is like the paradigm. Where once you're a little bit established, which is pretty much luck, it's like, the Dave Douglas paradigm, where it's like every 2 years you form a new band and you write a bunch of new music, and then you tour that, and then everybody who wants that is over, and while you're touring that, you're coming up with a totally new band and a totally new concept, and you record that record, and then you tour that record, and you do that until you die.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was just like, it sounds miserable. Like, I just want to make the music I want to make.
Yeah.
So, I thought about that for a while, being like, all right, Trio, should I do like a tribute record and like, play a bunch of like covers, like a Horace Silver tribute record or something? Just like, yeah, if we did that, we could like market it and then we like go play all these festivals. Is this like, cause like, look at the roster of a festival And like, how many of those bands are like tribute to so-and-so, or so-and-so plays the music of so-and-so? And it's just like, I don't want to do that.
Sure.
Like, it sounds like hell.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just like, well, I see how the game works. So I either continue doing this, coming up with a new band every couple of years and like, touring it. And I, kind of frankly, that's what happened this summer. Like, I put out the Rock Band record and a bunch of people were like, oh, you have a new project. Come play at our festival. It's just like, yeah, but I want to keep playing with this Rock Band for the next like 10 years. Like, it's not going to be a novelty.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm not going to like, all right, cool. What's the next, like that toured, scrap it. Next band. Like, I don't want
That's interesting in jazz world though, because in rock world or whatever, you could play the same songs for, sort of. I mean, you could put out new albums or whatever.
Right, but that's...
Like, feels like a different thing. Like,
I mean, if I want to get real cynical, I think it has to do with, like, there isn't all that much money in the jazz world in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are in it, a friend of a friend, once said, like, right, there are about 5,000 or 6,000 people total on Earth that actually know and care about anything we do. And that is not enough people to, like, generate an audience or make a living.
Sure.
So it's like the way you have to do it is like playing at venues and festivals where the majority of the audience doesn't actually know or care about what you're doing. They're just there to hear some jazz. Cool.
Yeah.
And so the only way you're going to do that is by enticing them somehow, either with some kind of like understandable program, like I'm writing music about global warming. And then someone's like, doesn't really, kind of likes jazz and like, knows Miles Davis and has heard Kind of Blue. And is like, some jazz music about global warming. Let's go check that out. But like, the tunes could be about towns in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
or whatever.
right.
It doesn't matter. So you're going to see a jazz band. And so
Yeah, right.
you either like deliberately do some kind of gimmick.
Yeah.
Or you do tributes to people that people already know. Like so-and-so plays the music of Miles Davis or so-and-so plays the music of so-and-so for like ever and ever and ever. And then... not particularly engaged, but still jazz festival going public is like, I know who Miles Davis is. I'll go check out that band.
Sure.
And so either one of those is like really cynical.
Maybe, but
unless you genuinely want to do that, in which case more power to you, and that's great.
Right. That's its own thing.
Right. So it's like if you are, and I'm not going to think of like a good example, but there are plenty of our peers who are like super invested in the music of so-and-so, and that is what they want to do.
Yeah.
And then they go around playing the music of so-and-so, and it's great. And like, I don't want to do that, but if you want to do that,
sure,
that is awesome.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and you've lifted yourself out of following any kind of a path
right.
in
It's
that
like
regard. You can do whatever it is
right,
you want to do.
I've always just wanted to do the thing that I want to do. And I got really lucky that for a while there was like, because of its novelty, there was like enough of buzz and audience about that we got to do all those gigs. Yeah. But at no point did I think about like, if I put out a fake bullshit smooth jazz record, people are gonna love that shit, and I'm gonna get more gigs. Like said no one ever.
Right. Yeah.
I totally got it. I'm gonna do some like avant-garde 1920s stuff with Brandon Seabrook and a tape recorder, like making squonky noises. This is gonna be great. It'll be huge. But that's kind of like what everybody's kind of under the pressure to do from John Zorn on down. Actually, like over the summer, like Zorn was touring with like his Bagatelles thing. Mm-hmm. It's like Zorn wrote a whole new book of music, and he's well enough known that like, cool, we're gonna bring you doing your whole new book of music because this is not just the same old John Zorn. Whereas, I don't know if unfortunately Zorn probably wouldn't be able to just like tour in perpetuity with Masada. Yeah. Just after you've played every festival, John Q Festival going public is going to be like, yeah, I've already seen that. And it's like, but they're playing completely different music. It's like, I've seen that band. And so it's like, you need that in the jazz world because it is fairly esoteric and the audience is fairly small that understands what they're hearing. You need a way to appeal to like a larger group. And so you get stuff like, and this is in no way pejorative, the Bad Plus, who are great. Mm-hmm. But it's like, there are a bunch of people that genuinely want to play kind of like indie rock as a piano trio. There's a massive market for that works out really well for Dave King, who is a beautiful human. And like, that's great. And I think that's awesome. I don't want to do that. Sure. But that is like exactly that they're doing exactly the thing that they want to do. And it happens to be like, they play a Nirvana cover and like the non-jazz invested public really likes that because it's like recognizable as a Nirvana cover, but now it's a piano trio. Yeah. Great. Like, I don't want to do a record of Nirvana covers.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm glad that they do, and I like hearing it. Or like, you know,
Yeah.
VJ are doing what's her name, MIA.
Uh-huh.
I happen to love that arrangement, and like I love me some MIA and I love me some VJ Iyer. But it's like I don't have any desire to do that thing.
Sure.
And so everybody is kind of forced to contend with if you're gonna tour for a living, you need to find a way to like constantly have like a new thing in order to like make that like viable. And that's like a part of the hustle that I just like have no desire to do. So it's like I'm going to just keep doing the thing that I want to do, and if every once in a while it's a thing that like gets me some gigs, that's great.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to kind of, you know, having thought about it, like if I was going to do a tribute record, I would do a Sam Jones tribute record. Like that's my favorite bass player. He wrote some pretty interesting tunes. He doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I wrote a bunch of arrangements and was like, all right, maybe the trio version of Most of the Other People Do the Killing is going to do this like Sam Jones tribute. But I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, you know, and like, I don't want to do to Sam Jones tunes what we would do to Sam Jones tunes.
Right.
You know, like, that's not the thing either. So
Yeah.
it's just like, I'm not going to do like a Most of the Other People Do the Killing plays the music of Sam Jones. And if I eventually do that, it'll be because I've finally gotten to a spot where I like found a way that like, okay, I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
But, you know, us playing a bunch of his tunes the way we play his tunes doesn't open any new doors,
Sure.
you know, and all it does is like, all right, here's like a marketable thing that's kind of disingenuous
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
So it's just like, yeah, I'm just, you know, maybe I'll get around to do that because like I've been thinking about that for a really long time, but now is not the time that I want to do that. And if I do it, it'll be because like I've decided this is a thing I really want to do.
Right.
And I probably won't get any gigs and it won't matter. Like,
yeah.
You know,
It seems like kind of an ideal mentality, though. One, and two,
if you're not trying to make money, it is.
Yeah, well, if you have the underlying thing,
Right.
Yeah, if you can teach or
Right.
whatever you happen
It's
to do.
the Charles Ives model. You
Yeah,
know, it's like
exactly.
when you're making music that's not going to make you a living, do something else for a living so that you can keep doing the weird ass music you want to do.
Yeah, Ives is. I mean, he was amazing because
He's
he was
awesome.
also
Dude
famous
sold
in
insurance.
the insurance
right, yeah.
world.
Dude
Like,
did
he-
not make any money off of his music in
Not
his
at all.
lifetime.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm very comfortable with that being the thing, you know, having made that decision a long time ago, but I also recognize that like lots of my friends are trying to make a living as musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those frustrations arise out of the idea that you can make a spectacular record and nobody's going to care
Sure.
in a global economic sense, you know. And so I have like multiple friends who work super hard and make the music they want to make and like try and hustle and get the tours and are constantly frustrated because it's super frustrating and like it doesn't take off and, you know, but this record's really good. And it's like, well, yeah, it is, but it's just a really good record. There's lots of those. And if there's no like gimmick, unfortunately, you know, at like the North Sea Jazz Festival, when there's like 20 concerts happening simultaneously and like, you know, somebody doesn't really know a whole lot about jazz is looking down the list and they just see random names they don't know, like they're not going to come check it out, even if it's the best thing on the festival.
Sure.
They're going to go see like the John McLaughlin tribute band,
Yeah.
you know, or they're going to go see the Miles Davis tribute band, or they're going to go see like this name that I've heard of who played with Miles Davis, you know, which is great, but
Yeah.
it's like that doesn't kind of create long-term economic viability unless you're kind of constantly having like a new thing. So
Right.
it's like, if you're Dave Douglas, here's my new band, and Dave Douglas is awesome and he's had dozens of great bands over the years, but it's like, you know, Tiny Bell Trio doesn't play anymore,
Sure.
you know, or, and even if it did, it's like, well, yeah, we already heard that band, like where's your next band? You know,
Yeah.
you need like this kind of like novelty thing, which
Sure.
can be difficult
Yeah.
if you're trying to do that for a living.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
because then there's pressure on you to do that.
Yeah.
And then frustration that like, hey, I've got this great band we've been playing for 10 years and here's our new record, and you don't get as many gigs this time as you did last time, because it's like, well, right, yeah, well, we had you last year and, you know, you're doing the same thing. Like, we want something different because we're trying to get people to come to the club who won't normally come to the club or the festival. And like the way that you do that is with like, you know, this is this brand new thing. Come see this brand new thing. No one's ever heard it before.
Yeah.
Which I get, but like that's kind of like the economic reality.
Of course. Yeah.
So I feel like I got really lucky that like the weird ass thing that I was trying to do happened to be a thing that other people wanted to hear for a while, but I kind of like being inside that game and seeing how it works. I was like, I don't have any any intention to kind of intentionally try and play the game.
Yeah.
You know, like while working on this thing, coming up with the next thing, and yada.
Yeah. But if you can get out of that entirely, you can, in many ways,
if you can,
most
and there
yourself.
Right, and there are a handful of people that do that, but it's not like large scale viable. Like, you know, all of us can't do that. You know, and so like thinking about the people who've been able to do that, it's, you know, like Ambrose, or Mary, or I mean, those are like the two examples that are like, you know, my peers that are like the most able to do that.
Yeah.
And they both have novelty about them. Like Ambrose won the monk competition, and Ambrose has like fairly interesting ideas about straight ahead jazz in general. And he's like a complete virtuosic monster. And even he's like, new project. Here's my new thing.
Yeah.
You know, and Mary, as like the only guitar player who sounds like that in the world, is still, here's my new band. You know, it's still a new band. Like she's not just touring with that trio that like was a thing 10 years ago.
Sure.
And, you know, that's kind of the paradigm. You know, it's like if those are kind of like the two most high profile of the people my age, like the way they're doing it is kind of constantly reinventing themselves a little bit context wise.
Yeah.
Right? Like now I'm going to do my thing with this new band. I'm going to do that for a little bit. And now I'm going to do this new band. And, you know, and that's how you maintain the kind of constant touring presence, which is kind of the same thing that like Dave Douglas does, and kind of the same thing that like Steve Coleman does, you know, for decades and decades.
Yeah.
And it can be like fairly exhausting, and there aren't that many slots for that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's only a few people that can like get to that spot.
Sure.
And yeah, I just kind of never wanted to play that game. Given that like I'm fine playing at like, you know, a basement on Tompkins Square Park for like 20 of my friends.
Yeah.
Fine. Like I'm good with that. And like doing whatever weird Pennsylvania crap I want to do.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah. The music doesn't change.
Right.
You do, whether you're playing for whoever, it's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like at least that's like the kind of like the way I've like approached the thing for, you know, the last, I don't know, 17 or however many years it is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, to wrap it up, if people want to find where you're playing or what you're doing, where do they look?
Yeah, I don't social media, so don't
Yep,
look for that.
not at all.
Although there is a mostly other people do the Killing Facebook page that Kevin updates when we have a gig.
Okay.
So but like we're about to record and we don't have anything on the books.
Yeah.
I will, you know, usually post stuff online, and like I'm pretty good about like, you know, contacting the various publications that like, you know, you're all about jazz, or your websites that like, here's where we're playing. So,
Sure.
you know, when we're playing in New York, it usually is known, and then if we're going to do a tour, I'll post that online, but that's not going to be for a while, just because like right now I'm in the midst of like writing and recording new stuff. So, I mean, I've been talking about like at some point in the next like week or two, I'm going to have to like book a bunch of stuff for the fall and next year, and, you know, to play the new stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've never social media'd.
Yeah. Is that a philosophical thing, or is that a preference thing?
I think it's a philosophical thing.
Yeah. I think it's a respectable choice.
Yeah, I just like, I don't like that, you know, and as you well know, I don't really text.
Sure.
Like, you know, I'm much more, you know, doing things in person and that way. Although, you know,
respect that institution.
Yeah, you got to put stuff on the internet somehow, though, or nobody knows what's going on.
Right.
So when I do something, it gets posted online. But there is no, you know, I don't like maintain my website or a Facebook page that tells people all the things that I'm doing. So yeah, like I play in that orchestra. Like I didn't tell anybody I play in that orchestra. You know, it's like if you're gonna come to an orchestra gig anyway, I happen to be there, but I'm not gonna be like, you know, hey everybody, I'm playing in this orchestra, come see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll find you.
You'll find it if you want to find such things. It's out there on the interwebs.
Yeah.
And so so usually in town, you know, we'll play at Shapeshifter pretty often because Matt Garrison is a good friend and kind of lets me go do whatever weird stuff I want to do there. And then wherever else around town, and that stuff gets posted on like those places' websites. But yeah, like those are yet more aspects of the business that I opted out of fairly early.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Yeah, when most of the other people plays, it is on the Facebook page.
Right on.
So,
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Moppa.
Yeah, thanks,
Appreciate
Bobby.
it.
Super fun.
Great.
Cool.